Okay, let's go ahead and get started. We got a action-packed Scour session coming up here. We got actually 5 presenters. There's only 3 in the agenda, but it turns out there's 5. So with 20 minutes and 5 minutes, we have little time. Bridge inspector and evaluation manager, and the state hydraulics engineer for the Tennessee DOT. He has also served as the Federal Highways Tennessee Division bridge engineer, and is currently serving as the FHWA senior Scour engineer. If you were here yesterday, you probably heard his updates with a lot of things dealing with Scour. So with more ado, Paul, please.
All right, so programmatic advancements of Federal Highway Scour program. That sounds a little innocuous, right? So it'll be a little clearer after I get started. So we procured the services of Ayers Associates to help us develop what will ultimately be a report on this, but it's not yet published. That's kind of a recurring theme. Okay, disclaimer, no dinosaurs for those who might have been here earlier, just our legal requirements. You can read that later if you want. Okay, so really the objectives of this study or research initiative, synopsis, whatever you want to term it, was really intended to be kind of a resource for our Federal Highway Bridge folks and others, but with kind of that knowledge gap. We know that as people come on to DOTs and people retire and shifting all around, there's always that knowledge gap, right? So both within state DOTs, consultants, Federal Highway even. So we thought, this will be a pretty good time. It was going on at the time we were preparing for NHEC. We thought, this would be a really good topic just for you all to hear, just for your edification. And ultimately, we'll post and publish this document, again, that you can download and refer to as you want to. So just a few of the related regulations and documents. We're not going to cover them all, of course. There's so many. And that was part of the problem, right? Which ones are still active and which ones are not. And so, anyway, that'll all be part of that. But just ultimately, this is kind of a compendium of all the related, our related memos, documents, manuals, all those sort of things for the Scour program. So we're going to go way back to that 87 time frame when we had, as probably many of you all recognize, the Scour Creek failure there on April the 5th of 87, kicked off the Scour problems that we had. Quickly followed on April the 1st of 89, the Hatchie River failure in Tennessee. Again, two closely following tragedies, right? Won't deny that, which brought in the National Transportation Safety Board, right, to do their inspections and evaluations and reports on findings and improvements. That always happens when you have these kind of incidents. And just for a couple of notations within many of their findings, Scour Creek, one of the lessons learned was the inadequate oversight or maintaining of the countermeasures there at the foundations that were necessary, so shallow foundations, right? And then Hatchie River was really one of the lessons learned was the importance of monitoring and watching and documenting lateral migration. Northward migration was a lateral migration that ultimately got an overbank pier, and communication was kind of a flaw. I'm from TDOT. There was a Tennessee bridge. It was not a good time to be having to deal with there at the DOT. So anyway, communication was another finding there. So again, just in chronological order, kind of moving forward because of this, these two tragedies certainly started with the Hatchie River. It was the genesis of the National Bridge Inspection Program. We put out a technical advisory 5140-20 And from that included, or followed by some preparation and issuance of some intermediate procedures for evaluating Scour, and then kind of an appendix within the existing coding guide at that time that addressed some of those items there in the coding guide. So all updates for some input and issuance of some important documents. Okay, so after that, we wrote a technical advisory 514021, which added things like some variations, the ability to have variation in inspection frequencies, started requiring underwater inspections, and scour evaluations. That was the first time we saw scour evaluations was in this 542021.21. After that, in 91, after we published the first edition of HEC 18, we came out with Technical Advisory 514023. It's still a relevant document. I refer to this fairly often. It's a good document, but it canceled those interim procedures and 514020. Like I said, still a good document. So I'm not going to go through all these, but a lot of these are pretty influential guiding documents and activities to the Scour program. And I'm going to cover a few of those. We already started with the interim procedures and Code of Federal Regulations, MBI compliance. So just for you to look at there. Some common terms within the Scour program. Again, many of those you're familiar with. If you weren't familiar with this, talked about it earlier, I think on Tuesday. The Scour program emerged, and certainly deeply rooted within the National Bridge Inspection Program. Scour appraisal is a new term. We talked about that. It's now defined in the updated regulations. National Bridge Inspection regulations we put out in May of this year, 22. It's kind of that overarching term that includes observed scour, evaluated scour, assessed scour. We felt like that was a good addition to when we're having those conversations. In the coding guide, there will be the old coding guide, current coding guide, the last bullet there. Will be sunsetted at some point. With the updated regulations, we added a new, quote, coding guide called the Specifications for the National Bridge Inventory, SNBI. You'll hear that term a lot, so go ahead and stick it in your brain now because that's what it means. And it'll be sunsetted. There's that transitional process from data from the old coding guide into the new data because the SNBI requires new codes. There's a lot of change there, and you'll see a little bit of that a little later, but all that's going to have to be transitioned over by 28, I believe it is, 2028. Again, all key terms here throughout the life of the Scour program. And again, these are just kind of, just some of the excerpts and memos and things like that. There's going to be a lot more depth to that. So, as I mentioned, the National Highway or the National Bridge Scour program is founded in the National Bridge Inspection Standards, but also in the second bullet there, the design guidelines. So AASHTO Bridge Design Specifications, they're incorporated by reference in the regulations, so they carry that kind of weight. Another example there, that third bullet is the term critical findings. We don't talk about that a lot unless you're in the inspection world, but there's a lot more emphasis, and I guess we did some clarifying within the update of the regulations, just to make it clear that whenever you have an observed scour condition that certainly affects the safety and of that bridge, it falls into one of those critical findings criteria, and there's kind of a whole process for a state starting with that critical finding and working your way through as a tracking process, working your way through to resolution of that critical finding. Again, a couple of more memorandums, key memorandums. In 2001, we did an update of a memo to update some of the codes, item 113 and item 60 in the coding guide, where we started talking about, scour being determined about observed scour, evaluated scour, or assessed. That was a key term in a lot of those in item 113. And that was a big change. The expectations, right? I mean, remember evaluations, if you were with us yesterday, or day before yesterday, it was yesterday, an evaluation is that the analysis aspect of it, where you're doing HEC 18, HEC 20, and do those formal calculations and analysis. That assessed is more of a HEC 20 approach. So we added that to the language in item 113. And then in 2003, again, we started being a little formal. There was always that expectation to look at your scour for all those bridges over water, make some kind of vulnerability determination. But in 2003, we put out a memorandum to require all the states to finalize, to perform those scour evaluations and to document them. And we actually had, it was a process where they had to track, 50% completion, 75% completion, kind of how they're progressing to the division bridge engineers at that time. 2010 memorandum, the annual compliance review, that's still going on. That's many of you may know about the 23 metrics, and for Scour, it's metric 18 is when the guidance came out for that. A pretty significant memo there where it talks about where the division is checking the records within the DOT or other owners, and where they find where maybe a scour evaluation maybe was performed, but they don't have any kind of records for that. We need documentation for that, and so ultimately things like that would ultimately weigh into a determination about in compliance or substantial compliance or non-compliance, and so that's kind of where that kicked off in 2010. And similarly in 2012 was kind of when we, and actually back to 2010 is probably one of the first actions we took with a risk-based data-driven bridge program activity that allowed that risk-based data-driven approach. Continuing that in 2012, we added more guidance for that risk-based data-driven program. All right. A couple of documents that you all are very familiar with, won't spend a lot of time, but of course HEC 18 is a key document within the Scour program. Been through a couple of revisions over that period of time, and again, HEC 20 is very similar. Again, if you're not familiar with that, HEC 18 is doing those calculations to predict scour depth in a short version there, and then HEC 20 is kind of that. You can use those step-by-step assessment process where you're looking at stream instability in scour. All right. And then HEC 23 is a two-volume document, if you're not familiar with that. Volume 1 does summarize our countermeasure experiences, selection, options, those sort of things, philosophies, new versus existing bridges. Volume 2 gives us design guides for each of those, a lot of those options, not all of them, but again, a key, again, going through several revisions, a key document within the Federal Highway Scour program. Okay, a couple of AASHTO documents here, as I mentioned. This is, both of these documents are incorporated by reference. What's important, I guess, technically, the 2017 edition there or revision and the 2018 for the manual for bridge evaluations are only the ones that are incorporated by reference. But again, key documents in the design and evaluation of bridges. As many of you probably know, the LRFD helps define the scour design flood and the scour check flood. and then kind of sets how those are associated with the, on the structural side, the strength of service limit states or the extreme event limit states, how they're combined to come up with foundation depths. And then kind of on the inspection side, gives the inspectors some guidance on meeting the National Bridge Inspection Standard requirements, keeping bridge files and documentation, and out in the field, collecting, critical data like cross-sections and things like that, and managing those to look for things like scour or lateral migration, for example. Okay, so what's new in the NBIS for, comparing the old coding guide versus the 22 SNBI? If you're not familiar with the right-hand side, I'm not going to go through each of these, do a crosswalk for you because it wouldn't be productive here, but it's really just to demonstrate that like I said, the old data from the old coding guide is being replaced with new data, and they don't align. Unfortunately, there's not an easy crosswalk between the two, and so Scour Critical, for example, is of the old 113. In the SNBI, Scour is now broken into two condition codes that they have to make a coding decision on. It's condition code, which is the observed conditions out in the field, versus the second code is vulnerability, where they are looking at the assessment or the Scour evaluation to make coding decisions for those. And again, plenty of guidance for the owners to make those decisions. But to me, it's pretty practical. Those I think we made some improvements there. Where 113 is that based upon there are codes that talks about vulnerability versus observed conditions, but I think this splitting it out just makes a little more sense. Okay, so just in summary, I just kind of wanted to give you a flavor of some of the type of materials and documents that we're putting in this report, so you'll kind of have that historical background, and then that the regulations that they're all associated with, if you would like to look into that, and all those are described here. Again, just a compendium of the programmatic elements of the bridge program. And once we get that published, we'll put that on our Federal Highways Hydraulics webpage, and you can get to that and download it if you want to. So again, one of the initiatives we charge heirs with was we gave some Q&As, some typical questions and answers that we get fairly regularly, both in the bridge inspection world and the more Scour program related things. So I just thought I would just kind of go through a few, and again, all these would be included ultimately, I think, into the document. But I think are all generally good questions. So so tell me what references requires me as an owner that all my bridges have to be assessed for scour. This is 653.13.01 in the new regulations. It states it specifically there. We hear assessments, evaluations. Historically, there's been other terms. Can you help us understand that? Well, 653.05 is a definition section, and they define, right there in the regulations, things like assessments are a qualitative review, right, of data, including observation of bridge inspections consistent with HEC 20. We talked a little bit about that. Whereas evaluations is more that, the calculated side. They're quantitative reviews. It includes calculations performed by a multidisciplinary team, consistent with HEC 18 and 20 documents. And then historically, we used, we always use evaluation. I think that's what confused people. A lot of our documents historically all refer to evaluations. That was just the term back in the day. So, again, just to respond to that specific question. Is the multidisciplinary team required to determine a bridge's vulnerability to scour? I think the answer is yes. It's in accordance with HEC 18 and 23, not 25. I don't know, sorry for the typo there. Both of those documents, refer to using a multidisciplinary team. I mean, it's a pretty practical thing, I think, that, no one person, no one discipline fully understands hydraulics and structures and geotech. And so I think there's been enough discussion so far this week. I think hopefully we're all on board of the value that each of those unique disciplines bring to the table there. And which HEC documents are required to be used for Scour studies. Again, 18 and 20 in accordance with. That's defined in 313. That's where HEC 20 and 23 and HEC 18, 20, and 23 are all defined or particularly prescribed in the regulations there. So, all right, just a couple more. What's the difference in the types of countermeasures for item 113, design versus non-design? As I mentioned, 113 is going to be sunsetted ultimately when they make that transition over to SNBI, but not yet. I mean, as we have that crosswalk or moving forward. But looking at that Scour vulnerability code that I mentioned in the SNBI, it talks about stable conditions are based on design, installed, and inspected countermeasure consistent with HEC 23, as opposed to those that aren't, right, non-designed. So that's covered there. What does implemented mean, and how does the state document in the bridge files the implementation of a POA? Well, that goes back to that Metric 18 process that we have, that annual review. And implemented means in that document for HEC, under Metric 18, it says a POA has been developed and field conditions are compatible with the required actions in the POA. So, you just don't have some template of a POA that this doesn't look, language in this makes absolutely no sense at this field site. So that's something that the division bridge engineer would be looking at for compliance or not. And then it also says documentation includes records in the bridge files demonstrating that the POA was followed, including any findings identified during the POA inspection. I thought the earlier session today with Matt Lawford and Joe Scanlon and South Carolina, Tom Knight's discussion about how all that field stuff you need to have that documented within your bridge files, whatever bridge files means, but somewhere where the division bridge engineer can look at that and validate that. I'm sorry, didn't click there. So, all right, that's all I had. It was just kind of a quick rundown of that document that'll come out at some point. And how are we doing on time? We fine?
I think we got time for
Just got a minute or so?
Yeah.
Otherwise, we can do it at the end, however you guys want to do it.
Does anybody have any questions for Paul?
Questions? All right. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, yeah, Nick.
Well, maybe we can talk about this later, but do you have any comments or recommendations on funding POAs? Not the construction piece, but the engineering piece, knowing that states have hundreds of these to manage, and are states tackling them one by one or bundling them by state?
The development of those POAs?
And is that federally eligible?
It is eligible under the current allocation that you get annually, for your bridge funds, whatever that allocation is. Those are eligible activities. There's no additional funding that's available for these type of, specific POAs and things like that, but definitely eligible.
Site specific, or are they doing 20?
Yeah, bundle on. Generally, we talk so much. I've heard it 3 or 4 times already. Each bridge is so complex, Nick, and I think that while there are, you could use boilerplate language. I hate to even say this, but there's certain, you need to look at a bridge. When you go to a bridge under flooding conditions, you need to look for, is there any dips in the rail or any lateral movement of the bridge, or any attack at your bridge approaches and things like that. Those are all fairly common things you're going to look at during your POA inspection, right, during flooding conditions. But it gets even more than that. I think it needs to be specific to each bridge to say, okay, more than that, from what kind of triggering event is going? The inspector's home on Saturday evening, having family out, and it's raining cats and dogs, and that Scour critical bridge that he's responsible for, 5 miles away, is starting to get to the point to where he needs to start doing those inspections. Again, however a state chooses to make those triggers or not, whether it's his supervisor saying, hey, start looking at your Scour critical bridges, that's fine, but all those things need to be defined in the POA, what those triggering events are and how they're going to be sent out. And then give him some language about don't make him guess about when's the time to close this bridge. You know, so it's starting to lap at the overtopping. Is that the worst case scenario that where it would be Scour critical? You know, the worst case, this probably should be close the bridge, if not even before that. So give the inspector, don't make him guess. Like I said, they're very good at what they do, but for things like when's the right time to close a bridge, because that's super important in a lot of cases, closing a bridge. We don't take that lightly. But again, don't put it on him. I think, as I mentioned yesterday morning, I think the hydraulic staff, engineers can really take the guesswork out of that for the inspector and put that in that specific, unique POA. All right? Yes, sir.
I was just wondering when the next version of HEC 18 will come out.
Good question. So HEC 18 and HEC 20 are probably, I would say, I know I have to compete with all the other HEC documents within Federal Highway. They are high priority. Funding, unfortunately, funding is always a problem, but I would say that that's two of the next HEC documents that we will update. You know, Joe may correct me, or there may be others that have a little disagreement on that, but they are super high priority, and they are, both of those documents are going to start that update process as soon as possible when we get funding. Good question. All right.
All right, let's
Thank
get
you,
a
guys.
round of applause for Paul.